Well, theoretically, you run for office, you represent the entire city. I don't like the idea that anyone should run representing a particular faction or subgroup. Certainly, some are more liberal or more conservative, or they feel like they represent this group or this area. Again, you get elected. These are at-large seats, meaning the whole city votes for you. So it's not like you're elected from one district or one constituency. You'll represent everyone. So I guess, at the risk of your thinking or the viewers thinking that this sounds like an evasion, I think the proper answer and my true views are that I am running to represent the entire city. The top three issues in this race, I suppose, would vary according to who you talk to. And it's hard for me to limit them to three. When I first ran for city council 6 years ago and won, I said I wanted to address traffic, and I still do, get people out of their cars and make the city more transit friendly and bicycle friendly and pedestrian friendly. We need lots more of that, and we've done a lot, and there's still a lot more to do. I also wanted to better empower and involve neighborhoods in decision making at City Hall. We've done a lot, still a lot more to do. They were getting very frustrated that City Hall wasn't listening to them. I'm pleased to say that I've been endorsed in the past and again this year by virtually all the neighborhood leaders, so I think I must be doing something right. I go to a lot of neighborhood and other civic events, and I think it's important that the neighborhoods be involved in a way that makes them feel like partners with the city rather than adversaries. Too often they feel like adversaries. What's the city doing to us? How come the city isn't telling us about this? What's going on? How can they be so stupid? A little communication can go a long way in resolving that issue. If you listen to their questions, listen to their concerns, tell them what's going on. There doesn't have to be that adversarial relationship. Um, uh, Greening the city generally is very important. Santa Fe's a leader not just in Marin, but throughout the state. Santa Fe is the first city to win a Beacon Award for greenhouse gas emission reductions. We just got this award in the last few weeks, and our climate change action plan is really a model. We commissioned and approved that during my first term on the council 4 or 5 years ago. And we need to do more, not just to green our city's municipal operations, but also our businesses and our residents. So everyone should sign up for resilient neighborhoods to get together with their neighbors and figure out how they can reduce their own personal household carbon footprints. So there's a lot we can do to further green the city. But there's two in particular I want to touch on. Really, the economy has taken a huge hit on everyone and every governmental entity, and we've had to cut over 20% of our budget and nearly that much of our staff. So we've had, across the board, huge staff cuts, and we need to restore those. And I don't see enough urgency on the part of the current city council members to restore that budget and restore those cuts. And so here's what I suggest. We need to take better advantage of our city's best asset, which I think is our downtown. And three ways. One is we add more amenities. Why is it every city a fraction the size of Santa Fe has a hotel downtown? We don't. We should. Maybe a music pavilion, maybe even a performing arts center, bringing a lot of money into the city. Second, we have all these great events on 4th Street. They close down the street and have these great festivals, fairs, and parades and whatever else. But they're talking about cutting some of them. We should be adding to them. They bring thousands of visitors. Eating, shopping brings sales tax revenue into the city. Third and finally, every city has to do its fair share of new housing. Ours, fortunately, is a very small share, but I think most of that should be downtown. It can handle it the best, and frankly, more people living downtown means more people eating, shopping, and bringing sales tax revenue into the city. So we bring more money into the city. We can restore some of those lost positions, including police and fire, because our public safety is at stake. Other city services, a lot of our quality of life's at stake, and even our property values. So we really need to have our city recover and recover its lost positions. One final point I want to make, I don't know if it's on your list of questions, but I apologize for going on so long. This controversy about housing, every city fights about housing. We're no different. But it's gotten particularly bad the last year. It's really torn the community apart. The idea that the Association of Bay Area Governments should do what SB 375 told them to do, which is create a Bay Area regional plan to encourage communities to build what new building they would do anyway in and along transit corridors rather than just sprawl, which is the way we've been doing it for decades, in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, good thing, and to create more livable communities that are more pedestrian, bike, and friendly. Why should that be controversial? It shouldn't be. The only reason it is horribly controversial is because people perceive that it's being imposed upon us from some unelected regional agency and as excessive unwanted growth that's going to ruin our city and ruin our county. None of that is true. This is voluntary. Do you want to do a priority development area? Only one city in Marin did, San Rafael, and only in 2 places are 2 smart stations. Transit-oriented development is a good thing. That's where our growth should be. As I say, downtown San Rafael, as I mentioned earlier, and the other one, the Civic Center. I think the city council made a big mistake a month ago when they suggested, oh, okay, we'll remove the priority development area designation, which was voluntary, from the Civic Center, even though the plan for the development there is good, thus giving up several $1,000,000 every few years in transportation infrastructure grants, which we'd otherwise be entitled to. It's very easy to point fingers at and say ABAG's this big horrible bogeyman, but it's not true. It's good planning, and we should do it, and people should not be afraid of it, and it's not going to ruin our city. Every elected official manages the agency's budget. Santa Fe City Council is no different. Tens of millions of dollars in our case for the general fund and some special funds. Every year we go through intense workshops and gather community input, gather staff input, neighborhood input. Probably need to do more of all those things. It's been particularly tough the last few years as we cut and cut and cut at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. Now that the economy is recovering, it's more like how do we restore, but it's not recovering fast enough, which is why I think we need to bring more money into the city. But we take very seriously reading a lot of information, listening to our experts. The city manager, who is our primary employee that we work through, we hire and fire and evaluate, in turn goes to her department heads and says, okay, this year we have 10% less money, so you all need to give me a scenario for how you would cut 10% from your individual departments. Some we might cut 15 from, some we might cut 5 from. For example, that's what we did a few years ago. We'd cut public works more and police and fire less. Now the issue is how can we restore those positions, in what order and what priority? These are the tough questions. That's why we get paid the big bucks, $500 a month in salary. Cooperation with the public, I think I mentioned earlier. It's very important to be very active in the community, and not enough people do that. Too often people run for public office, and I see it every year for the 30 years nearly I've been doing this. Never heard of them before. They've never done anything. Well, maybe they've been on a little community organization or two. But ideally, they should have been on dozens of boards. I know I have. They should have spent thousands of hours. I know I have. Very few others have. They should know the community, know the leaders, know the issues, and so you have an idea of what the community issues are. Yes, you can rely on polls to some degree, and yes, you need to rely on your good common sense to some degree, but how can you expect to have the respect of the community in making decisions which are in the best interest of the entire city unless you actually have experience, not just an ego that says, I think I'm smarter than anybody else, or I think I have good common sense. It's from working in the trenches for years and years, for ideally thousands of hours. Maybe some do a few hundred over the course of years or decades, but at least ideally thousands. I'm still not sure what you mean by control of yourself. Can you elaborate on that question a little bit?
Just the dynamic between, in town meetings and stuff.
Being civil to each other?
Yeah.
Well, Santa Fe City Council has a good reputation. It's consistently rated by the Pacific Sun as the best run city, and the City Council is generally quite collegial. They don't have the fights that some cities do. They don't stay up till 2 in the morning like some cities do. They have a very professional staff, and they work together very well. There's, in fact, very few split votes. That doesn't mean there aren't some. The one I mentioned about removing the priority development area designation from the Civic Center Smart Station area was a split vote, 3-2. It was very close. That could change, I suppose, but I think you can disagree without being disagreeable. You can be respectful and yet firm. You can give your opinions and try to rally your colleagues to your point of view without being angry or resentful. And if you can't do that, you probably shouldn't be in this business. That isn't to say that there aren't lots of elected officials at all levels that do get angry, that are disrespectful, that can't, I guess your description is a good one, that can't control themselves well enough. But I think to be a good elected official, you do need that self-control. You do need that respect. And I think we do a pretty good job at the Santa Fe City Council. We all get along pretty well, and I hope and expect we will continue to do that, whether or not I get reelected. When I say reelected, I'm not a city council member now. I formerly a council member from 6 years ago to 2 years ago. I suppose a bad elected official can do very bad things and hurt you. it's not quite that blunt and simplistic. It's if you make bad decisions, hopefully the people will realize it and you won't win re-election and so you won't be in there long and you won't do too much damage. But how can you repeat the last part of that question, which is the important part? What can you do to make sure that you're doing a good job and helping people?
Yeah, like what does it look like if you are doing a good job?
Some people scoff at this, but the city does a very professional poll every 2 years of its residents. It kind of tells you what the important issues are, and it says, how are we doing? How's our police? How's our fire? How's our garbage collection? How's a dozen other things? They used to say until this year how the city council was doing. Of course, city council members very interested in that information, but frankly, I agreed with the pollster to drop that question this year because, frankly, the public doesn't really know how the council is doing. Yes, they vote for them, and they probably forget who they are, 90% of people, right after they vote, because they don't really see them very often unless they're really, really active in the community, and maybe 2 or 3% of the people know who you are instead of 1%. If you're doing a really bad job, I suppose you might get a little more notoriety, but generally most people don't know who you are. Most people don't read the paper. Most people are not following these things online, getting their news online. Even though now it's easier than ever because our city council meetings are broadcast and videotaped. You can watch it live or you can go to the website and watch last night's meeting or last week's meeting. So there's really not much excuse if you want to be involved to know what's going on and watch your council members in action. People don't. A very small percent do, and we made it a little easier for that few percent, but most don't. But that doesn't make it any less important. We are making important decisions that influence the lives and the quality of life of people. It influences their public safety. Are we going to rehire more police and fire faster? I hope so. Are we going to be able to rehire more public works workers more quickly so we can fix the potholes, which some people see is one of the most important things we do, and we ought to stick to that. I think, most city council members, I'm afraid, don't pay enough attention to the revenue side of the equation. The same thing can be said about the state legislature and Congress. They just, cuts, 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 and if money starts flowing back in, what do you do with it? But what can you do to maximize that income, as I said earlier? I'm not talking about taxes, although I think the tax increase on the ballot this fall, Measure E, is a good idea. I'm talking about making better use of our properties. I think there are ways we can do that to maximize our income and increase it. And as I said, make better use, take steps to increase the sales tax revenue the city receives. We have two giant chunks of money. Property tax, which we can't do a lot about. In good times, it flows in and increases rapidly. In bad times, like the last few years, it drops like a stone. But sales tax revenue, we can do something about. I think we can make it, probably a lot of people would be leery of turning San Rafael into this huge tourist destination if it means traffic jams and it means they can't go downtown to their favorite stores. But I think since we have the best downtown in Marin by far, I could say that without fear of contradiction, and our downtown is worth size-wise and urban-wise all the other downtowns in Marin put together several times over, we can in fact handle crowds of people from the outside. First of all, let's see if they can get them in from our neighborhoods. That would be nice. A lot of people don't even come downtown anymore because of homeless folks, which is a shame. And I think we're turning the corner on it. That's another issue I hope we get to. But I think we should bring in people from our neighborhoods. We should bring in people from throughout Marin. We should bring in people from throughout the Bay Area. I'm not suggesting that people are going to come from all over the country and the world to San Rafael, but they might, they could, they should. But certainly the neighborhoods of San Rafael and throughout Marin and maybe even the Bay Area. The Brown Act has, for decades, I believe, mandated that all public bodies meetings be open to the public. So they have to be posted like 72 hours in advance. You can't meet with more than one of your colleagues and discuss anything of a substantive nature. So everything has to be, so it's ironic. There are some bad things to it. Why is it the local paper can ask us questions and put our pictures and our quotes in the next day's paper, and only then can we find out how our colleagues feel, because we can't talk to each other. But that's a good thing. You don't want decisions made in smoke-filled rooms. You want them made out in the public. So the mayor and the city manager will put together an agenda reflecting their best guess of what topics should be covered, and city council members have some input into that. Not as much in San Rafael as I wish they did. It's one of the things I'd like to see changed. But they come up with an agenda, and those are the things we cover. And you can't cover anything not on the agenda. People can come up and speak to you and say, I'd like you to cover this and this. And we nod politely and say, thank you very much. We'll get back to you on that. Or talk to the city manager, or we'll see. And next time the mayor considers the agenda, maybe he'll put it on the agenda, but you can't discuss it then because it would violate the Brown Act. And there's only a few things specified by law you can talk about in closed session. Things like litigation, real estate negotiations, personnel negotiations and bargaining. A few things like that you can talk about in closed session because they have to be confidential. But the vast majority of things, only at a council meeting, only with the full council there, only if they've been agendized in advance. That's how the blue sky laws, the open meeting laws, including the Brown Act in California, work. There isn't much about that. Maybe because we haven't had a problem. You say it requires us to govern ourselves. Well, most of us think of us as governing the city. Yes, there is a code of ethics which is very important. For example, we cannot accept a gift worth more than $45, I think it is, without reporting it. I've never had to do that because I don't want to have to report it. I don't want to look like anybody's giving me gifts. You can't accept a gift of more than, I think it's $250, if my numbers are correct, at all, from anyone, under any circumstances. Such gifts are banned. Again, you don't want to look like you're in the pocket of anybody giving you gifts. We've all heard too many horror stories of somebody getting gifts to baseball or football or basketball games, or getting trips or getting other items of value. Not allowed, except in small amounts. And those are the kind of code of ethics I think should be followed. Other code of ethics involved civil behavior, both among your colleagues and to the public. Probably observed a little too often in the breach because elected officials do get angry and lose their temper and misbehave. We've seen it too often on the national level, the state level, and occasionally even the local level, although local elected officials are generally held in much higher regard than state and national officials, which are generally held in pretty low repute and generally seen as pretty dysfunctional bodies for very good reason. But by gosh, our local officials, we see them at the supermarket. We see them at the local events. So we know them. We get to talk to them. And they do. And so it works better. That government which is closest to home is the best government, they say. And I think that's true.